Okay. Guys, I am so sorry. Okay. Technical difficulties. Oh wow, I cannot find her anymore. What is going on? Oh, there you go. There's Huma. Gotcha, I gotcha. Sorry guys, we're having some real technical difficulties. Hey Salah. Okay, oh, Sana is messaging me.
All right.
There we go.
Okay,
We've got to get Sana on here.
did she message you guys?
She did. She said she just updated her Instagram, so maybe that was it. But try her again. Send her the invite because you're gonna have to do it, I think, because it's your platform.
I'm gonna try it again.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Okay, there she is.
Oh,
there she is. Hello.
Hi, Salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Yeah, it was weird because I was like in the chat, but like I was like sending messages to him. I'm like, oh, no one can see my messages. And I was like, well, okay.
No, we saw. Girl, we see you loud and clear. We hear you loud and clear and see you loud and clear.
Awesome. I saw two of you had Timmy's, and I was like, oh man. I mean, I've got iced coffee, but it's not.
That would be the Canadians.
Yeah. Wait, is everyone? No, not all of us are Canadian here.
Yeah. No, I'm from New Jersey.
Right.
So, I mean, where do we even start? Someone, you want to start the convo?
Hoping that we can all, introduce ourselves. First of all, I just want to thank all of you guys for taking the time out to, join me. My name is Sonia. For those who don't know me, I am a beauty and a fitness influencer. I'm a mother of 3, and I am so glad that I have this platform where I can, spread this awareness with these beautiful ladies. So it was actually Huma's idea to go live, and I'm so glad that she asked me, and here we are. So Huma, you might.
Me? Okay, my turn. Okay, well, I've worked dabbled in media, very little local media. I hosted a show with Rogers and then Omni Television for a few years. So pretty much just locally in Toronto and the province of Ontario. And now I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I'm just an angry individual seeing all the stuff that's going on in the world, and we need to talk about it. That's pretty much my intro.
Let's go. Who's next, Huma or Sana?
Sure. Go ahead.
All right, I'll go next since there's really not much to say about me. I'm, my name's Maham, and I'm not qualified for this in any way, shape, or form, but this is something that I'm like really passionate about, because I feel like everybody should be passionate about this, since it's like a humanitarian crisis, right? So it affects all of us, and I think it's important for everybody to use their voice and whatever platform they have to kind of give exposure to this. So that's why I'm here.
Cousin.
And the guest of honor.
All right.
Salam everyone. I think there's like a slight lag, by the way. I don't know if it's my internet connection, but salam everyone. My name is Sana Said. I'm based in DC, but I'm a Canadian. And I work for AJ Plus, which is part of the Al Jazeera Media Network. And I've been writing about, speaking about issues related to Palestine, specifically as it relates to like how we in North America talk about it and experience it and whatnot for like about 10 years now. And so recently I also did a piece for AJ Plus, which did a critique of the way in which Palestine in general is discussed in our media landscape, and using the example of the recent 11-day Israeli assault on Gaza. So I always like to make clear that I'm not Palestinian. A lot of people think I am just because I go hard for Palestine. So I just want to make sure that that's also clear, that I'm not Palestinian.
You don't have to be Palestinian, right? That's the message that we need to relay. No, I'm saying that, it's not just everybody's angered, because anybody with eyes can see the footage that's coming out. It's undeniable. And if you check all of the criteria for an apartheid state, Israel meets each and every single one of them. And you've actually highlighted that in your videos and done such a great job. So from a media perspective, sorry if I'm asking too many questions, from a media perspective, what's the change that you're seeing in the narrative that we've had so far? Are you seeing a significant difference as far as the Zionist, one-track narrative that we've been taught? I mean, obviously you are a godsend, but in mainstream media, are you seeing that change happening?
Thank you for the generous words. I mean, I'm just one of many journalists, Muslim, non-Muslim, Palestinian, non-Palestinian, who is kind of trying to push that. And we've been working towards pushing the boundaries of our industry for a long time. In terms of have there been any significant changes, it's funny because I will say that where I have seen significant changes is more in people's attitudes. So like this time around on social media, I mean, I still vividly remember even there's 2009 Operation Cast Lead. In 2014, we had Operation Protective Edge, which did, which claimed over 2,000 Palestinian lives and also played out on social media. And this time around, and Protective Edge lasted, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was about 6 or 7 weeks. This time around, watching this play out on social media, there was a stark difference in the tone of people like us who were watching this unfold, right? For the first time, I was seeing people use words very unapologetically. People who are not themselves, connected to the conflict, to any of the religions associated even with the area, saying that this is apartheid, that this is ethnic cleansing, that this is, these are war crimes, and in a very unapologetic way. I saw, even surprisingly, people supporting or defending or trying to better situate even like Palestinian violent resistance, not just simply nonviolent resistance, which was a shock for me because I've never seen that in all the years that I've been, whether it was participating as a student in Palestinian organizing, Palestinian Solidarity organizing, SPHR at McGill, or it was, as a journalist writing about these issues. So that was the language which everyday people are using now is like, to me, I'm like, what happened overnight, right? Like I was talking to my colleagues, I was talking to friends of mine who are Palestinian, and we were just like, did we miss a memo? Like everyone seems to be going hard for Palestine. Like what just happened here? In terms of media, I don't think we've actually seen at all a shift. I think that there were a couple of exceptions. Like, I like to give credit where it's due, but not too much credit. Like, so the New York Times, which I think is one of the worst perpetrators of really dehumanizing coverage of Palestinians and of the occupation and the system of apartheid. The New York Times, for instance, did have a couple of really good pieces that they put out. There was a piece by Shira Frankel and another journalist, which looked at how these within the proper borders of Israel, there were these Jewish supremacist mobs which were organizing on WhatsApp, and it was a very kind of honest look at like this story that had kind of been ignored a little bit, the fact that there were mobs organizing through social media to attack Palestinian Arabs within these Israeli cities, which are built on, of course, ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages. So there was that piece. There was another piece in the New York Times, which was by the former Jerusalem bureau chief, David Halpfinger, which was just a look at the mundane, everyday violence of the occupation, which is something we don't hear about, because usually when we hear about Palestine, it's in the context of extreme violence. It's never the fact that like the ultimate source of the violence that we see is always going to be the military occupation, the system of apartheid, over 73 years of ethnic cleansing. That is the context. And so that was very surprising to see. And then, of course, the now famous cover of the New York Times showing 67 children, 66 of whom were Palestinian, one Palestinian girl who lived in Israel, and another young Jewish Israeli boy, showing their images and their stories about what happened, how they were killed. And I think those are a couple. We also have the New York Times and a couple of other platforms actually also publish, personal stories, narratives from Palestinians, which we don't actually see, right? Like we don't see Palestinian Americans allowed to personalize the conflict, the occupation from their end, right? So one of my own colleagues, Leila Al-Arian, who's an incredible journalist, she works for Al Jazeera English's Fault Lines, executive producer, Emmy Award winning, like more Muslim Americans, Muslim Canadians need to like know who she is, because she's doing some incredible journalism, which is being recognized in our industry. But she wrote this beautiful piece about how her grandfather owned a home in an apartment within that building, which was the, you know, Associated Press, Al Jazeera Arabic office space. You know, she's like, that was like, I have a connection to that building and now it's destroyed, right? And so she talks about her own connection to that. And I thought it was really beautiful. We saw Ayman Mohyeddin, who's doing incredible work. Ayman Mohyeddin, who I believe is half Palestinian, talk about his own experience living in Gaza. And then also when he covered, you know, Operation Protective Edge in 2014 and what he experienced there, and giving a bit more of a personal, you know, approach to things. We saw Ali Velshi on MSNBC.
Oh my God.
Right? Yeah. Like, who is, you know,
that was pretty mind blowing. I was like, wow.
It was amazing because I was like, but these are also, I want to point out, these are like Al Jazeera family, right? Like these are Ali Velshi, Ayman Mohyeddin, Lil Arya. These are Al Jazeera people. You know, Ayman is at MSNBC now. Ali Velshi is at MSNBC. They're doing great things. But Ali Velshi is straight up saying like, hey, this is apartheid. Like, what? And that was incredible to see, right? Yeah. But these are exceptions. Overall, we saw a really, in some ways, I would say a worsening of the language that was used. The fact that you had almost near exclusively Israeli, you know, Israelis themselves. So like IDF spokespeople, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, individuals in that capacity, political capacity, who were given far more of a platform than actual Palestinians themselves, right? I can think of two Palestinians who were consistently given, consistently is an ambitious word, but were given a platform to speak. And it was, you know, Mohammed Al-Kurd, who kind of became the face of the ethnic cleansing attempts in Sheikh Jarrah. And then, of course, Noor al-Erakat, who's a professor here in the DMV area, the DMV meaning DC, Maryland, Virginia. And those were the two primary Palestinians I saw kind of represented. They were not the only ones, but you know, like that's not enough, and that's not okay. So that's kind of my little audit in a nutshell in terms of how did the media actually cover this, and my overall, like, you know, conclusion is not very well, but that did not deter people online, like everyday people, from calling, excuse my language, calling the BS, right? Like people called out the BS. I saw Reuters actually change their headlines after receiving backlash from people when they said things like, you know, residential building in Gaza collapses. It's like, well, why? Why did it collapse? Yeah. Like, you have to specify why. Oh, then they changed it to, you know, collapses following Israeli airstrike. Or destroyed, right? Because it collapses. No, it was destroyed by an Israeli airstrike. Language matters, because we need to be accurate with what's happening. Because then, you know, we're letting Israel off the hook. We're letting any power that is kind of you know, enforcing this kind of violence off the hook when we're using minimizing language.
So what do you think about, Maham, you want to ask a question? Let's talk about the narrative. Yeah,
so I was going to say, I think that a huge change that I saw was, you know, in the years before, I haven't really seen much, many people, you know, even like in my own circle of friends or anybody really posting about this kind of stuff online, right? And I think a part of it was a lot of people are just not informed, and there's a lot of just misinformation going on and everything. But I think now, like, everything's so much more accessible, and people are talking about it a lot more now online, at least through social media, you know, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is. Even though, yes, like, you know, the whole censorship thing is real and it's happening. So that's kind of like disheartening that we're seeing that happening as well. A lot of my friends have told me that their posts, people are telling them their posts are coming out just as Black pictures and stuff. So on Instagram, for example. So, you know, it's, I think that played a huge role in kind of giving this genocide, like, a little bit of that exposure, right? And now people are seeing, and I think, you know, like all the videos and yeah, they are graphic, and a lot of the content you see online is, you know, kind of like graphic and hard to see. But I also think that kind of helped to give that exposure, because I think it's so easy for us to kind of like disassociate from what's going on, because we're so far away, and it's like, you know, like we can just kind of, like even on Instagram, you have the option to kind of push that button, you know, sensitive material. Do you want to see it? Do you not? Right? And we can just choose to go past it or not. But this is like the reality of the Palestinians, right? Like the little kids that are suffering there, the mothers and the fathers that are losing their children, they don't have the option to kind of just, you know, close their eyes and be blind to what's going on, right? So it's so important for us to see that too, and to share these things online, because I feel like it, you know, you need to see that, you know, because they can't filter out what's going on to them, right? So we need to be all like exposed to that and kind of be able to share it and you know, put that information out there to everyone. So I mean, you know, my biggest thing is do whatever you can, like in whatever capacity you have, right? So, you know, whether it's just through Instagram, sharing and hitting, it takes 2 seconds to hit share, you know, or if it's like protesting, you know, there's so many protests going on. Join a protest. You know, other people are signing petitions, reaching out and calling their, you know, local politicians or whoever, like whatever capacity you have, use your voice, right? And don't think that, oh, I'm just one person and like, you know, whatever I have to say isn't important, or there's already X amount of people doing it, so let them do that work. I think every person needs to use their voice in whatever capacity they have, you know. And honestly, I've been that like Instagram troll online. So like if I see like somebody posting, and you know, someone knows this. So, you know, if I see anybody online posting any kind of misinformation or using, you know, I'd like to like correct the language too, right? Like for example, like even like Mark Ruffalo, like I was so disappointed when I saw what happened, right? It was such a huge shift, right?
So yeah, so that's something that, you know, someone, maybe you can pick, you know, Sana's brains about that, because that just shows the control of the Zionist media, right? Like, what is it that, I mean, the threat that's there, you know, people are silenced. You know, I think that's a huge thing that needs to change, and that's mainly the reason that we're here, to kind of correct that narrative and to kind of give people the freedom to speak honestly, which is what people are doing, I think. So someone add something in there.
What makes them change like their,
Yeah.
what happened? Is it some pressure that they're getting from somebody? What's going on?
So I think it's a mix of things. Like, I don't think there's like this whole, I mean, you hear it often as well as like how much Zionist influence there is in the media, so on and so forth. I think it's a mix of things. A lot of people don't realize that the largest Zionist organization in the United States is actually a Christian organization, right?
Yeah,
And the name is escaping me, but they have like 7.2 million members. Like Zionism in the United States is probably at this point defined more by evangelical Christians than it is by,
thank you.
you know, American Jews themselves. Because what we see within the American Jewish community is actually a move away from Zionism, right? Especially the younger population. They're like, wait a second, maybe all these things we've been taught aren't so true, right? Like, you know, so there's a lot more questioning. We're seeing that more and more young American Jews are kind of moving away from that. I can't speak too much to Canada with regards to that, because I haven't looked at the most recent stats, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same kind of situation. But with regards to like Mark Ruffalo, right? Like that was really disappointing, because Ruffalo was coming out hard. Right?
Yeah.
Like during the Israeli assault on Gaza, he was coming out extremely hard, and it was really great to see, because Ruffalo has always been like one of those people who very much so is siding on the side of justice, right?
Yeah.
On many things, whether it's climate, whether it's like, you know, atrocities happening abroad, etc. And he's also been pretty consistent on a lot of issues regarding Palestine. So, you know, I remember actually he, you know, shared this, I think it was Avaz petition, which was like to, you know, he's like, we need to sanction Israel. And I was like, wow, you know, like, you know, coming out in support of like essentially BDS. I'm like, that's incredible, etc. And then to see that tweet from him, which was like, oh, you know, I kind of reflected, and I shouldn't have used the word genocide because it actually fuels anti-Semitism. And I was like, whoa. There is so much to unpack here, right? Because I'm sure he received probably, you know, I think it's a mix of things. I'm sure his like his PR people were like, dude, like, you know, because
career suicide,
damage control probably for him.
Sorry,
I said they're probably trying to do damage control for him, for
exactly,
losing followers or whatever is important to them. Yeah,
exactly. Because let's not forget, he's part of the Marvel franchise, right? So I don't think it's like people who themselves even identify as Zionists who are like, whoop. I think it's more about like people being like, oh, bruh, we have, you know, a lot of stock in this film, etc. We don't need people coming at you. So I think there's also an element of like almost preemptive censorship that sometimes happens, right? Where other people are like, we need to be careful about the PR, et cetera. Because also the word genocide itself, right? It is a very charged word, right? Is it accurate? Absolutely. If we look, and people forget that, like, there's actually no real difference between ethnic cleansing and genocide. The real difference is a legal one. Genocide is a legal term under international law. Ethnic cleansing is something we use primarily to describe essentially genocide without actually calling it genocide, because once the international community recognizes that there is a genocide happening and they say this is a genocide, that actually forces the international community to intervene. Like they have to do, like, I think it's like chapter 6 or chapter 7 intervention, right? And so like the term genocide, so I'm like, you want to call it ethnic cleansing, fine. It is what it is, because under the UN, oh my God, why is it escaping me? The statute, hold on, it's called I want to make sure okay, so the definition of genocide under genocide prevention and responsibility to protect office at the UN, you know, there's several, there's 5 kind of criteria for what amounts for. You only need to meet one of them, right? Yeah. You only need to meet one. And on that list, there's at least 3 that are met, right? So I'm like, if you even want to look at it from that perspective, you know, yes, it does, you know, what is happening in Gaza in particular, but also when you look at what's happening to families in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, yeah, it can absolutely amount to genocide. But you don't want to call it that, okay, but then it's also, you know, ethnic cleansing. Secondly, I think it's really unfortunate that the narrative of anti-Semitism took over, because no one was actually critically examining where that narrative was coming from. Were there anti-Semitic, you know, attacks? And so, yeah, absolutely, there were. We saw them. You know, there were things that were left at synagogues. There was, you know, there was one particular incident I can think of in London, which was disgusting. But the source that was saying that, oh, there's been like a 468% increase in anti-Semitic attacks was the Anti-Defamation League, which is infamously anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-BDS. And when you actually look at their anti-Semitism tracker, yes, there are some serious, like, whoa, okay, that's, you know, that's legit. And then you have things that in which they are equivocating anti-Zionist, anti-Zionist, anti-occupation signs and protests as anti-Semitic, right? Yes. So it's the conflation of being critical of Israel with anti-Semitism. And no one, so all of a sudden you have all these politicians, you know, you have all, even, you know, I was just like, I'm done with you. But like, you know, Senator Bernie Sanders came out and actually said something so incredibly damaging when he said, we need to tone down the language, you know, because so that it doesn't lead to more anti-Semitism. I'm like,
so I missed that, and that's very disappointing.
It was very disappointing, and it's also disappointing because I'm like, I don't know, maybe when Israel starts toning down the war crimes and apartheid and occupation, we can tone down the act, because he was saying using a term like apartheid is charged language. I'm like, are you going to tell Human Rights Watch, which is the most like centrist type of organization? It does, you know, it's so not like, you know, it's, no one would ever call it a radical leftist organization or anything of that sort. It took them a very long time to come to the conclusion, and years of research, including by like, you know, Omar Shaker, who is an incredible lawyer who's been working with Human Rights Watch for the last several years. He was banned from Israel as well for his research and whatnot. You know, they've put in so much work, and to come to that conclusion, like, yeah, there are crimes of apartheid being committed in Israel, like, undoubtedly. And then to call that charged language that then leads to anti-Semitism, even though there is absolutely no causal link that has been proven whatsoever that talking about apartheid, describing something as apartheid leads to, right? And so what was infuriating was then the entire conversation went from like, oh my God, Palestinians being slaughtered in Gaza and being ethnically cleansed in Jerusalem, to, oh my God, anti-Semitism in the United States. Everyone needs to condemn this.
Yeah. It's the victim card, right? And then there's Hamas, and then there's, so that's the distinction that I think we need to really stress on for people who are watching this, that anti-Zionism is not anti-Judaism, right? This is something that is very widely known now. I think on social media, people are really making that distinction. And if you look at Judaism, there's so many Jews, there's so many groups that I've seen, so many Jews standing side by side with Palestinians who are actually practicing Jews. I mean, if you look at the Torah, if you look at the 10 Commandments, Zionism breaks 3 of the 10 Commandments, right? So how are you associating that with Judaism to begin with? So they are not practicing Jews. It's a political statement that they're making. It's a political movement, and it's racist. So I think it's great. So my question for you, honestly, Sana, was like, it's very brave. I have to give you kudos for the courage that you have to speak so openly. No, because mainstream media doesn't do it. So the alternative media, like AJ Plus, is very well known. I actually recently learned that you are the producer or host. Like that's your baby, right? So that's amazing, because that platform always gives the realistic and honest, factual view. Have you faced any backlash because of the reporting that you do? And what gives you the courage to be able to kind of go out there and do that and kind of put it out there the way it is?
Yeah, it's, I mean, I think sometimes, I hear this sometimes from people as well. They're like, I've heard it a few times. They're like, oh, Palestine, I guess, is sexy and like, it's like cool. And it's like, no, it is to publicly, especially when you're someone at all public, but even career wise, like we see in the United States, especially, you see it in Canada too, we're like standing for basic even humanization of Palestinians, right? Like not even if you're openly calling for the liberation of Palestine, but even if you're just saying, hey, maybe we should humanize Palestinians, it comes at often a cost, a personal cost, a professional cost, a material cost. And, for me, like, I think, so just a little background about me is that a lot of people, like, I actually want to write about this, is like, I come from, my own position on Palestine and Palestinian liberation evolved like out of ignorance ultimately, right? Like, obviously growing up in a Muslim household, you're like, I'm always gonna go hard for Palestine. Doesn't mean you actually know what's going on, and you don't necessarily know what does it mean to actually be in solidarity. And it was only when I was like in college, I got really involved with Palestinian solidarity organizing in Montreal. Like, for anyone who's been there or knows anything about it, is really a hotbed of activism. Like it's a very, so it was like a great place to like, kind of like sink my teeth into activism. But then also like, I was in 2009, I was in college when Operation Cast Lead happened, and it was an absolutely devastating, assault on Gaza, where we saw even white phosphorus used, chemical weapons used. And I saw the way in which like the narrative played out on campus, right? And I was like, oh, and that was kind of a much more of an awakening moment for me. And for my master's, which I did in Islamic studies, I actually did on Palestinian refugees, right? And I did on Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and I focused on kind of like, it's like really niche, but the idea was like, so during the Oslo interim period, so from 1991 to the year of 2000, there were all these conversations happening on what are we going to do with Palestinian refugees? Because Israel does not recognize the right of return, which is fundamental in any solution that comes. Palestinian refugees need to have the right to return to their homes, to their lands, just the way, right? The way in which it's actually really ironic, because like the ethnic cleansing currently happening in Sheikh Jarrah, right? Like the argument that the Israeli courts are making, well, before 1948, Jewish families lived in these homes, right? And so they have a right to return to these homes. Well, by that logic, the Palestinian families that have been living there since 1948, they only moved there because they were ethnically cleansed out of their other homes, right? Yeah. So they were moved out, so they have a right to, but Israeli law does not allow Palestinians to return to their homes because it's an apartheid state.
None of it, yeah.
So I focused on Palestinian refugees, and that to me was probably the single most radicalizing moment, because it made me realize, I'm like, this is not a complicated issue. It is very black and white, right? And I think for anyone, and it even changed my, like I didn't sign on to BDS when like in 2009 and 10, when there was a call to BDS, I was like, well, I don't know. What about like academic exchange and cultural, don't we need these things, right? And within a couple of years, I realized, it's a really stupid position for me to take, because I'm like, BDS is something that is very necessary, as like, especially if Palestinian society has asked us to adopt this in solidarity with them. And so for me, it was like, at the age of, so how old was I? I was like 23, 24, where I really was like, yeah, this is, I can't call myself someone who believes in things like decolonization, someone who is anti-racist, someone who, is in solidarity with the oppressed, if I don't understand how much of even oppression here at home is directly tied to the oppression that we see in Palestine. Like, people forget that like Palestine does not just exist in and of itself. Palestine is what is happening there is directly related to I mean, for us here in the United States, for Canadians as well, that's tax money. Our tax dollars are going directly to killing Palestinians, to ethnically cleansing them as well. And it's not that, you know, people will say, well, Israel is, you know, well, why do you treat Israel differently than other countries? It's like, well, the question is, why do countries like Canada and the United States treat Israel differently?
Yeah.
Well, that is why we focus on Israel as well, because there is a special relationship, what Obama called the sacrosanct relationship between like the United States and Israel. And that is what, and it is damaging to human life. And that is why we're calling it out. In terms of the impact that it's had, yeah, I mean, I faced backlash for years. In 2014, I wrote an article called the Interfaith Trojan Horse, and kind of looking at a term that I called faith washing, which was how interfaith is used in our communities, like between like Muslims and Jews, is actually used to normalize Zionism and relationship between, like, you know, and to suppress BDS efforts on campus. And I kind of exposed this trip where, like, and it's still happening, where, like, you know, Muslims are being sent to Israel to this like Zionist organization, which is anti-BDS. And the idea is that you come back with like your Zionist talking points and anti-BDS talking points, and you kind of break the picket line, so to speak, right? You're now talking and normalizing Zionism in your communities. And I received a lot of backlash. For 2 years, I was called, you know, someone who was spreading fitna in the Muslim community. I received threats. I was accused of, like, oh, if anything happens to the people on this trip or who are involved, you will have blood on your hands. I mean, I was isolated from people who, like, you know, I had a huge community or like a network. I was isolated from my network because I was seen as like untouchable, like controversial. I mean, in the end, I was proven right. So, you know, dust off my shoulders. But like,
that's what happens, right?
Right? I'm like, you know, justice, truth, and Allah are on the side of those who serve justice and truth. So I'm like, so, you know, but like, it was very lonely, and it really tested my faith too, to have like the community, because I'm like, I just did this because I love my community. I don't want to see my community, you know, involved in something that's unjust, right? And so when I wrote this piece, that's the intention I wrote it with, and that was very hard. And then professionally, yeah, like I interviewed for a really big position a couple of years ago, back in 2018. Thank God I didn't get the job for other reasons, but like, you know, I had this one of the managers there, he'd already interviewed me on the phone. And so they had brought me in for an in-person interview, and it was in New York. And he was a former, you know, senior editor at another major American news organization. And now he was at this one. And, you know, he was like, look, I already spoke to you on the phone. So like, I don't, you know, I know what I need to know about you with that, but I want to talk to you about something else. I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. He's like, let's talk Israel. I was like, what? Like, you know, and it was the first time I had that come up in a job interview. And he actually pointed out that 2014 article that I wrote. And he's like, I read this article that you wrote. And actually one of the people that you mentioned in it is a good friend of mine. So let's talk about this. And he started like essentially like asking me questions about my ideas on Israel and Zionism and on liberal Zionism and this and that, And in the end, like I had to just stop him because it was so kind of overwhelming. And we had an hour together, or half an hour, whatever it was. And I was like, we are not going to spend this. This is a job interview, not like an ideological like inquisition. So I said to him, you know, he asked me some other question. I said, I'm going to be honest with you. And I said this verbatim, and I was like, I can't believe I said that. But I said, I'm like, I know the positions and views that I hold are not popular within this industry and probably can cost me a job, but I would much rather, you know, be on the right side of history and justice than, you know, be, you know, then get a job at the expense of that. And I remember, I'll never forget what he said. He kind of looked at me and he's like, I respect that. And honestly, like, your work was a fantastic piece of investigative journalism. So he's like, and I respect that deeply. Right. Which surprised me that he said that, because I thought he was going to be like, blah. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You know, and you know, other things, there's a massive profile written about me on Canary Mission. I don't recommend anyone go visit it because it just helps the Google algorithm if you visit it. But they have like a massive essay written on just how I'm an anti-Semite and this and that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And that's a website that attacks, you know, students, professors, journalists. And I think I'll just wrap it up with this, is that, like, you know, ultimately the reason why I'm so outspoken, and why I think a lot of other journalists who are outspoken is this is the reason we got into journalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason we, like, people who come from marginalized communities or are get into journalism is because we know the power of media, because we've seen how the spread of information, of misinformation, of disinformation actually has a direct impact on our humanity and how we and others are humanized, right? We see the way that, like, Black Americans are dehumanized on a daily basis, right? We see that. And then we also see the way in which our own kin, our direct kin in faith are dehumanized abroad and here as well. And so I think, like, growing up, especially like coming of age during like the early 2000s, it was like I was going to become a doctor. You know what I mean? Like that was the plan. Like so many other Desi kids, it was like, I was a doctor. Then I was like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer, right? Because I was like, that is like, I want to be an international lawyer. I want to work with prisoners of war. And it was just a realization, like, no, it's really, the information war is huge. And so we become journalists because, not because we're like, this is exciting work. It's because we want to get in there and tell the stories that we know impact our communities, other communities, and work to dehumanize or humanize us. So that's why, like, you know, I know that I probably am not a very employable person in many news organizations, but I'm okay with that. Like, I'm willing to take, and that's the thing that people need to realize is, like, we do this at the expense of, like, our careers. What we love. Like, I love my career, but I do this because I love justice more. I love my people more. I love my faith more and all these things. And I'm like that, like, I became a journalist to serve truth. And that is when I speak, like, you know, about Palestine, it's in service of truth. It's not in service of my career, for instance, because I'm like, guess what? It's not really like a career making position to take when you're talking about Palestine. And I think that's with everyone who talks about Palestine, is like, we do it knowing that that it hurts our career growth, but that it's something much bigger than us that's important. And that's the smallest sacrifice we can make when there are people who are putting their lives on the line every day by simply existing as Palestinians.
So I know Summon's got a huge following too, and Summon, give us a little bit of your feedback. I mean, you've been posting regularly too, so what's been your experience?
Not a lot of, like, flashback, but I got a lot of negative comments on my but then again, I had amazing Jewish followers that appreciated they were with me. And there's one guy that I know who works for a gym, right? And he told me, he's like, I told my family, if you're going to be against Palestine, you are not talking to me. And I thought that was really comforting. So there are awesome. But the first thing that they say, but what about Hamas? But what about Hamas? You know, that's
the deflection that's the deflection tactic, right? That's the narrative of the media, and it's not working anymore, though, Sana. I think that it's backfiring on them, especially being journalists like Abby Martin. You got Robert Martin. Those people are on the ground. They're seeing what's happening. They're putting out the footage. Gaza Under Attack was a documentary Abby Martin made. It was amazing. I suggest everybody go and watch it. So the fact that they blew up the Al Jazeera building, what was your reaction to that? I mean, that's just a sign of guilt for me. That's pretty much like the minute you're starting to censor the information, you're guilty. Like, otherwise, why are you trying to control the narrative so badly? So, I mean, you work with Al Jazeera. So what was your, impression or feeling? I mean, it must have been insane to kind of realize that they did that.
It was, but it wasn't surprising, right?
No, it wasn't surprising.
The Israeli military has very often targeted journalists. Certainly Palestinian journalists are constantly, I mean, even just a couple of days ago, they arrested 2 female Palestinian journalists. Like, that's, it's funny when people call Israel a beacon of, like, democracy. I'm like, yeah, but for who, right?
Sorry, I have to laugh every time I hear that. Yeah.
It's like, okay. But yeah, the attack on Al Jazeera, AP's building was not all surprising. They've attacked, press bureaus before as well. And I think, like, for us, like, we were definitely really, I mean, of course we're upset, right? Because those are our colleagues. That's our family there. And of course, and we're also just upset because that's another whole, like, people forget that Gaza is the size of Detroit. Detroit's not a very big city, right? If you know about Detroit, it has 2 million people who live there. That's it. It's very cramped. People can't go in, can't come out, right? Like, that's the way it is. And things can't go in and out. So when you're also destroying whole buildings, That is rubble that they have to then clean up. And they don't get cement just like delivered. They don't just make cement there. Like they don't have the basic materials to rebuild. It takes like, I think they were saying like there were still parts of like Gaza that are still unbuilt from 2014 and even 2009, because like they're just, those materials are not, because Gaza is under a blockade. And so, because that's the thing, you'll hear like, oh, but Gaza isn't occupied because there are no more settlements there. They pulled out in 2006, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, there are no settlements there, but Israel controls absolutely every single thing related to Gaza, from the, like everything that goes there. I mean, it's a population under siege. And so, yeah.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, it's just common sense, right? I mean, you've got separate walkways. You've got control of the water. The water is poisonous. 95% of the water is undrinkable, and parents are forced to give it to their children. And they're isolated. They're isolating them from the world. Like, these people can't even flee for their lives. Like, even when, you know, Christian anti-Semitism drove the Jews towards Palestine, they were allowed to flee and save their lives. These people are literally blocked in. So it's like I said this before on another live that I did, that it's like being in a marriage with a sociopath. You're married to this sociopath who's controlling your environment, it's isolating you, deciding what you eat, when you get up, where you sleep, if you can get medical supplies, what kind of food you get. It's a complete control of these people. And I mean, I'm in awe of their resilience.
Another thing that I think it's also really important for people to remember is Gaza. So it's a 2 million population. Almost 50% are like young. They're like teenagers, right? They're under the age of 15 or younger. And then on top of that, 1.4 million of the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are refugees already. They're refugees from 1948 who were like fleeing the ethnic cleansing. And that is where they ended up, in the land that we now, like that area that we refer to as Gaza, right? And they're stuck there, right? They can't leave. So, and they can't return to their homes as well. And people don't realize that this is and then on top of all of that, they have been consistently, you have millions of or hundreds of thousands of Gazans who've been displaced again and again every time Israel does this. This time around, I believe it was almost 50,000 Gazans were re-displaced internally within Gaza, right? And within Gaza, you have refugee camps, right? So this is a refugee population, which is internally displaced again and again and again every time Israel does this. Right. And at some point, I'm like, what is that? Like, one of the criteria for genocide is when you make conditions unlivable for a population. People tend to think a genocide means, a dwindling population, right? So if your numbers are dwindling because you're getting killed and wiped out, that means that's a genocide. But look at Palestinians in Gaza, they reproduce like crazy. So how can it be that's not what genocide is. Genocide is not just simply the systematic physical killing. That's actually one of like the last things. Genocide consists of making it so that a population ultimately gets to a point where it can't even exist anymore. And when you look at what's happening in Gaza, it's like a strangle. Like there's a reason why people call it an open air prison. There's a reason why, you know, the UN has repeatedly said that Gaza is unlivable and people are still able to live there somehow, right? And when people, you know, to an earlier point that someone was making, you made as well about Hamas, right? Like, I think like people forget that, you know, Israel as an occupying country, right? As the fact that it is a military and a state that occupies the people, it has a legal obligation to protect the people it occupies. But Israel does not recognize international law. It does not believe in that. Right. And when you talk about Hamas, like, I think that's what's really interesting is that a lot of people this time are saying, so, you know, this also gets like lost in all the subtext as well, as like Hamas itself, right, which is actually extremely popular amongst also Palestinians. I think there's oftentimes an attempt to whitewash, like, oh no, Palestinians don't agree with Hamas. I'm like, no, actually a lot of Palestinians do in fact support Hamas. And what we forget is Hamas itself is a political organization. They have a military wing called the Al-Qassam Brigade. Right. And I'm like, the Al-Qassam Brigade is the section which is then, you know, categorized as a quote unquote terrorist organization. Hamas itself is not categorized as a terrorist organization. And that is a nuance that's very important to mention, is that Hamas itself is seen as a political organization, and the Al-Qassam Brigade, which is the military wing, is the one that's seen as a terrorist organization. And again, it's also worth iterating that the word terrorist especially means very little when Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist for decades and was
Yes.
still on the U.S. terrorist list until like 2005
Yeah.
or whatever it was, right? And then he became a freedom fighter, and then he became the president of South Africa, of a liberated
Exactly.
South Africa, right? Post-apartheid. So even when we say the terms like terrorist or whatever, it's like, what does that actually mean?
What does
And
that
it's
mean?
usually a political term, or it's, the use of it is a very political term in these contexts as well. So yeah, the Hamas stuff is always, I mean, again, it's like Hamas has like a believed arsenal of like 6,000 or 7,000 rockets compared to like the Israeli military, which is not only, it's a nuclear power. It has like apparently like 80 or 90 nuclear warheads. Like it receives a $3.2 billion in U.S. military funding. Like,
yeah.
Where is the comparison here at all?
There is none. There is none. And that's the other thing. Like, I mean, I never supported, like, I know Trump was horrible, but when Biden was coming, I knew what was coming. Like, because I think a lot of Muslims kind of knew that because of his past voting record and support for Israel. Same with Kamala Harris. A lot of people were very excited. She's a South Asian woman. She's a half black woman. People got so excited. She's going to be so great. But I had seen her record. I had seen it, and I wasn't getting excited. I wasn't going to celebrate her because you cannot, I mean, you can't be for Black lives or for LGBTQ or for feminism or for women's rights and then not support this very important cause, right? You can't have that selective humanitarianism, that selective activism. And it's so blatant now. It's so it's so transparent, I mean. So, I mean, she's very dangerous. They're both very dangerous. And the fact, the audacity, like, what did you think when you saw Biden, you know, pledge the 38 million or I mean, 735 million that he had? I mean, just the audacity, the sheer like callousness of this is going on right now. And you are so bold that you like, what makes him so comfortable? It's AIPAC, it's the Zionist lobby, I'm thinking, because you did a whole piece on that as well.
Well, so what I did was, I didn't do one on the AIPAC lobby, but I will say, or like the pro-Israel lobby, I think like a huge reason is, because the thing is, it's I think people forget, like, the reason why the United States supports Israel is actually not because of the lobbies, right? I think that's easy for, like, I mean, I believe that for a very long time too, but when you actually look at why, it's because Israel is of great geostrategic importance to like American imperialism in the region, right? Israel essentially functions as a country, like a client state of the United States, right? So even, you know, and that's the thing, right? Like, Joe Biden famously said, if Israel didn't exist, the United States would have to create it. And I'm like, the amount of truth that statement has, because it has nothing to do with like a lobby. What it has to do with is that Israel serves a very particular function, which is offsetting the influence of other countries in the region and allowing those countries to actually be financially, politically independent in any way, right? Israel ends up being used as kind of this, Israel, not just Israel, but also like obviously Saudi, the UAE, et cetera, which are now all like in an alliance, but Israel is the central kind of country that's used. And so, you know, I wasn't surprised. Like the piece that I did was, you know, I was like, why Biden will be worse for Palestinians, right? I did a piece about this, which was that Biden will be worse for Palestinians because everything that was seen as radical under Trump, because Trump was horrendous for Palestinians in so many ways. But the reason why Biden would be worse is because what was radical under Trump is just going to be normal under Biden, because the Biden administration had zero interest in curtailing or rolling back any of the kind of radical moves made on the Trump administration. So, for instance, moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is huge, right? That's not something that they were planning on, you know, going back on. Like, no, it's going to open up in Jerusalem. It's going to stay. You know, the adoption of a very particular of the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association, I believe is the organization. Their very specific definition of anti-Semitism, which includes, you know, criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. You know, the Biden administration said, yeah, we're going to do this. And they consistently reiterated their support for Israel. So I'm like, this is, and of course, Kamala Harris herself has consistently spoken at AIPAC, including in 2020 and 2019, or 2020, I can't remember. It was like, time is a blur because of the pandemic. But when there was like the kind of, you had, you know, a lot of Democratic candidates back out of speaking at AIPAC because of pressure, Kamala Harris didn't back out. Kamala Harris just spoke privately, with AIPAC people, right? And there was no kind of publicity around it or whatever. But Kamala Harris, if you listen to her speeches from 2017, 2018, I mean, they're like horrific. They're horrific, right? And she's more to the right on Israel than even Joe Biden is. Joe Biden, I would say, is not ideologically really, I mean, I think he is to an extent, but I don't think he's really ideologically committed to Israel. I think for him, he's a foreign policy guy. So for him, Israel is, like I said, like he said, you know, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it. For him, it's more of like a geopolitical importance and whatnot, right? Whereas I think for Kamala Harris, I think she needed, like, you know, she's not exactly a very popular politician. Like, people forget this. Like, there's a lot of excitement around her, but she wasn't, like, she nosedived during the primaries. I know everyone was like, it's going to be Kamala Harris, and then she just nosedived because she really didn't stand for anything. That was the critique, is that like every other candidate has maybe something specific they stand for. Kamala Harris is like, she's like, I care about infrastructure, and everyone's like, that's not really okay. But like, you know, so she's not really very popular. And so Israel became this huge thing for her, where she was like talking about how she would, as a child, you know, help fundraise for Israel, right? And it's like, ew, what? Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, so you mean you were actively helping colonize Palestine? Good to know. And I think that's another thing, is like, it's not just about, it's about like, so individuals such as, you know, the Biden administration, I mean, the entire Biden administration, it's not just about complicity, but it's about like active participation in the colonization and the ethnic cleansing. It's not just letting it happen, it's actively being involved in making it happen. Right. And I think that's also important in the language that we use. It's like, it's not just complicity, right? It's not just like allowing it to happen, giving it permission. It's like actively working to make sure that that does happen. Right. And that's why Biden and Blinken approved and work. I mean, Blinken went to Israel to secure the deal. Right. In the middle of this, he went to Israel to secure the deal as Palestinians are being slaughtered. And I'm like, yeah, that's just American foreign policy at work. That's exactly, I mean, Obama was inaugurated right after Operation Cast Lead, which killed 1,400 Palestinians. And it was brutal war, like it was brutal. And under Obama, you had one of the largest military deals with Israel ever signed.
Yes. So this is the thing, right? Like, they'll put this, you know, and I mean, someone give me your feedback on that. What do you think? Or you guys, Maham, step in.
I mean, I think that's kind of why, you know, I think before we just offer up our support and like our votes to all these politicians, you have to force them to take a stance on this topic, right? Like, you can't just let it be, you know, like, for example, like even with the LGBTQT topics and everything, because there was so much support for those things, right? Like, there was protests, people were vocal about it, and, you know, that became a topic that was discussed in every sort of election, right? You couldn't avoid it. It was unavoidable. And just, I feel like that's something that where we kind of lack as a community too, because we don't really, we're just like, half of us are like, oh, we're not even going to vote anyways, right? Or what's it going to do? Like, they're both, you know, both the candidates are no good. So what does it matter to even vote? Things like that. So I think that's where it becomes important for us to like really get into that and force the politicians and, you know, people that are our voice and our representatives for our voice to address these issues, right? And to take a stand on it and back us up with that. And, you know, it's something that they're going to have to address moving forward. It's not just, you know, okay, they didn't take any stance on it or they were silent about it. We have to kind of push that onto them and give a voice to the Palestinians, right? So I think that's where, you know, the petitions and reaching out, like emailing, you know, your representatives and doing all of that is going to kind of help in that department. And I think, I don't know, I mean, like, that's personally for me, I think that's like the biggest thing that needs to kind of change for us.
So, I mean, I did a lot of investigating. I know quite a few people in the community, and I was very angry, and I came across very probably judgmental, probably ticked a lot of people off, but that's okay, because at the time I'm just thinking, look, we put you in these positions, you have these platforms, we vote for you, you are supposed to be our voice. And the whole thing comes back to the Mark Ruffalo, they'll silence you. So from my investigation, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys have any insight on this, politicians are literally given a script of the narrative, the Israeli-friendly narrative that they have to address if they make a public statement. If they don't add the words conflict, if they don't add the words both sides, if they don't add the words peace on both sides and Israel's right to defend itself, it won't be approved by the Trudeau government. They're not, and if they do put out an honest statement, then their jobs are at risk. So do you see a change happening from politics? I think that the social justice is what's actually the social justice media, the people are people like yourselves, the alternative media. I think that's bringing more awareness and enlightenment. And that, I don't know, for some reason I'm gravitating towards that, because if you look at the International Criminal Court, you know, they've got citation after citation against Israel, but they won't take action because they're put in place by British colonizers. Like the whole system, I feel like, is built by colonizers for colonizers. So
100%. Plus, also, like, whenever the UN does try to do anything, the United States just vetoes it. Like,
yes, exactly.
Like when you have veto power and like the veto power is on your side, like, you know what I mean? If you look at UN resolutions that have criticized, not even said let's do something, just criticizing Israel. Yeah. Even like in the UN, right? They call for a ceasefire, and the United States actually, like recently, and the United States vetoed it because they were like, it's too like there's language critical of Israel. It's like, you know, so I think, yeah, I don't believe in, very long time ago, I stopped believing in electoral politics as being the driver for change. That's not to say electoral politics don't matter. I think on a very local level, they matter, but in terms of major change, it needs to come from people themselves. Like if we look at every major movement and anything major that's ever happened to change the course of a country's history, it's come from grassroots organizing first and foremost, right? And then the courts catch up. And then the politicians catch up, right? So, you know, as mentioned earlier, right, the issue of like, you know, the Marriage Equality Act in the United States, right? Even that term, which I'm going to get to in a second, like that didn't, for a lot of people, like you're like, whoa, that just happened really quickly. But it's like, if you look at the LGBTQ movement in the United States, I'm like, that was going on for decades. It was extremely well organized, right? At some point, it also became very well funded. It was a really strong hold on a particular narrative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then even the language, right? Like that's another thing, is that I think as people who are advocates of Palestinian liberation, like you need to be really, really specific with your language. It is apartheid. It is ethnic cleansing, genocide, right? And those are language we need to also, no, anything less is not okay. Right?
No, exactly.
It is the occupation. Call it the occupation, right? Don't call it a conflict. It is the military occupation of Palestine. Yeah. And so, like, the really interesting thing is the fact there's a reason why the Marriage Equality Act is called marriage equality and not gay marriage, right? Because people were saying, like, well, when you say gay marriage, right? Like, for a lot of people in the LGBTQ community, we're saying, like, when you say gay marriage, it's like there's marriage and gay marriage. When we're just saying it's just marriage. Marriage. That includes everyone, right? And so the idea being like that, even that focus on language was such an increment, like such an integral part of the LGBTQ movements, especially for marriage equality, the movement within the LGBTQ movement, which was pushing for marriage equality. That was a huge, and that's like, we should not, like, that should also be an example, which we can learn a lot from actually the LGBTQ community, despite like our community being like, ugh. But there's a lot you can learn there from like the importance of language, the importance of organizing, and the importance of knowing what is the goal. The goal is, you know, sanction Israel, boycott Israeli products, name it for what it is, end the occupation. And at this point, a two-state solution is not possible. So one state, which is one vote, democratic state where everyone's an equal citizen, right? Absolutely. I'm like, that should be the goal. And that's like what everyone should have an eye, like the eye should be on that. And that means you do what you can do, which is, you know, by the way, we were talking about earlier, but like sharing stuff on social media actually does make a difference in certain situations, right? There's sometimes, yes, it is very performative and whatnot, but in situations like this, Palestinians are actually asking us to share things, right? Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out to, I should have done it earlier, but like Subi Taha, right? His like Subi Taha, who's the TikToker, Instagram, etc. I'm not usually like a huge, like his content's not really for me, but honestly, massive shout out to him for the content that he created early on Sheikh Jarrah to explain what was happening, because that was all over like Desi Mom WhatsApp. Like everyone was sharing that. Like, which is the quickest way to spread news. The quickest way, right? Actually, it's funny. My one of my friends was saying, she's like, oh, one of my videos that I did, she's like, I sent it into my, she's Iranian. She's like, I sent it to my Iranian mom, you know, her WhatsApp group. Let's see how long it takes to circle back to you, right? In your family WhatsApp. I'm like, yeah, let's see. Because that's like a little game we play sometimes. We throw things into the WhatsApp right when it comes back. But, you know, I'm like, shout out to him. Like, that made a difference because a lot of people had no
Yeah.
idea what was going on. But
They
here
don't.
you have a popular TikToker who actually
Yeah.
used his platform, right? And someone like you have a massive platform. It makes a difference to use
Really
that
big
platform because you don't know who's
Yeah.
watching, and they're like, I didn't know that.
I do have.
Yes.
I know we.
Go ahead.
But even I have to go because my husband just came in. Last question:
What?
how can we keep up with the awareness? Because I feel like it's dying down. How can we just keep about it?
I think there are a couple different ways. One, follow journalists who on Twitter, on Instagram, etc., who are talking about it. My Instagram is like a mix of like work and personal stuff, so it always confuses people. But on Twitter, I'm a lot more consistent on this stuff. My Twitter is just simply my name, Sana Said. Other journalists include my colleagues, such as Muhammad Al Safin. I mean, I retweet. If you follow me, you'll see them in my following list. Dina Takruri. She's another presenter, an incredible journalist who has done a lot of reporting from Palestine directly. She's done some of the best work, I would say, on the issue. You have Lama Al-Arian, who is with Vice. She was just in Gaza as well. They just did a piece from Gaza. They were in Jerusalem. Her and Hind Hassan News on Twitter doing fantastic job out of Palestine. Of course, you have a lot of Palestinians themselves, like the Al-Kurd siblings, Mona Al-Kurd and Muhammad Al-Kurd. Oh, by the way, also that video of Mona Al-Kurd arguing with the Jewish settler from Long Island,
yeah.
right, where she's
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
you know, Yaakov,
Yes.
like, why are you? This is my home. Why? Are you? That video, right, spread like wildfire and made. There were a lot of people who didn't know that, like, you know, a lot of people don't know this. 15% of Jewish settlers, or more than 15% of Jewish settlers in the West Bank, are American.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
people saw this American guy, they're like, "Wait, I didn't know that."
With a New York accent.
Exactly, with like this Long Island accent, right? And so that it does make a difference sharing things. You know, make sure that you're also verifying. Make sure like you're you know, is this a sound source? Oftentimes there are people like someone, you know, there are a few people on Twitter that I always say avoid them because people like CJ Whirlman, he's really popular. I would say, you know, that's someone I would actually stay away from because I think he spreads a lot of incorrect information. There are a lot of you know, because if you're also spreading that information, not only are you participating in spreading incorrect information, but it actually damages the cause. Because every time we spread misinformation, it actually hurts the overall cause because it's easy for anyone to point out and say, well, you're just spreading propaganda. So make sure like what you're spreading is verified. You can verify it yourself, do the research. If you're, it's not enough for us to be passive. We have to be actively engaging with the information we're sharing and making sure it's accurate. You don't need to be a journalist to see if something is accurate or not. That would be my advice.
So,
you're muted, Simon.
Oh, I know. Sound is muted. But no, I'm so glad she agreed to lend her profile to her platform to this because I think we, you know, got the word out to a bunch of people. So, Simon, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I can't hear her.
Oh, you're still muted.
She's muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you at all.
But
Not even touch the phone.
oh, there you are. There you are.
Hear me?
Yeah.
No,
That was so weird. Yeah, you were completely muted.
Oh, it's cut off. It's cut off. But
No.
No,
Now
now
we
it's
can
back.
hear
It's
you.
like I don't know what's going. It's going.
I think when you move back, it kind of cuts off.
yeah, maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. Okay.
No, I was just thanking you. I'm like, thank you so much for agreeing because, you know, it's so important to spread the word. And, you know, I've been trying to pick Sana's brains and like, there's certain things that we need to get out, which I think we really did. And I would say everybody, please follow Sana Sayed, that Sana Face on Instagram. Check out her videos on YouTube. They're so informative. I must have watched like 6 or 7 of them, like, you know, one after the other. And it's just, really, I applaud you because this is the job that mainstream media should be doing. And, you know, it's amazing that there's people like you and you know, Saman and Maham, you know, that you're using your voice honestly. And I said this before too. I'm like, you know, everybody wants us to Martin Luther King it, but we need to Malcolm X it now. We need to Malcolm X it because that's it. That's the courage I think that is required to bring the change that's needed. And this is the time because it's too much right now. So that's just my little 2 cents. You guys finish off. What are your thoughts? Oh no.
Oh no, you're muted again.
Why is doing that? I have no idea. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
little.
Okay, so I'm gonna save the video on my Instagram and I'll send it to you guys as well, okay?
Please.
Great.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Yes.
check it out.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so
No
much
worries.
for having me, by the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to keep in touch for sure. And then, you know, just keep doing the great work you're doing. This is what we need, right? So thank you so much. And Maham, you're so adorable. Thank you. And we're all going to keep in touch now. And we'll hopefully do this again. There's lots more to talk about.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
guys.
Take care.